Every morning the ritual is the same, yet the weight feels different every time. I walk into my chambers, the sun just beginning to hit the brick buildings of downtown Providence. I see my reflection in the window, and for a second, I don't see a judge. I see Frank, the son of an immigrant milkman. I see a boy who grew up in a house where every nickel was counted, where the sound of the radiator clicking meant money was disappearing, and where my father's tired eyes told me everything I needed to know about the dignity of work. When I reach for my black robe, I feel the texture of the fabric. It's heavy. People think it's heavy because of the law. I think it's heavy because of the expectations. When I zip it up, I'm no longer just a man. I am a symbol. But I made a promise to myself a long time ago. I will never let this robe turn my heart into stone. On this particular Tuesday, the courtroom was packed. The air felt stale, recycled by an old ventilation system that had been groaning since the 1970s. I looked out at the sea of faces. Most people were staring at their phones, some were nervously tapping their feet, and others were just numb. But my eyes kept returning to the back row. There sat a man who looked like he had been carved out of exhaustion. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't angry or impatient. He was defeated. And next to him was a little boy. The boy was wearing a coat that was clearly a hand-me-down, several sizes too large, making him look like a tiny soldier in a uniform that didn't belong to him. I noticed the way the boy kept looking up at his father, checking his breathing, watching his hands. There was a role reversal happening there that I needed to understand. Case 402. The City of Providence versus David Miller. The bailiff's voice echoed, hitting the marble walls and bouncing back. David Miller stood up. It wasn't a quick movement. It was the movement of a man who felt the weight of the ceiling pressing down on him. As he walked toward the podium, I watched his hands. They were trembling. Not the tremble of a guilty man afraid of a fine, but the tremble of a man whose nervous system had been pushed to the absolute limit. I looked down at my computer screen. The digital file was clean, clinical, and cold. I clicked on the video. On the screen, I saw the intersection of Orms and Charles. It was a rainy night. The asphalt was black and shimmering under the streetlights. The light turned red. 1 second passed, 2 seconds. Then a silver sedan, rusty with a flickering headlight, barreled through the frame. It didn't even tap the brakes. It was a blatant, dangerous violation. "Mr. Miller," I said, my voice resonating through the microphone, "I'm looking at the footage. You didn't just miss the light, you ignored it. At 3 in the morning, the roads are slick. You were traveling at a high rate of speed. This is a $300 fine plus court costs plus a late fee because you missed your initial hearing. We are looking at nearly $500 today. Tell me, sir, what was so important that you decided the safety of the public didn't matter?" David Miller looked at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't defiance. It was a raw, agonizing memory. "Your Honor," he started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I'm a single father. My wife, she's been gone 2 years now. I work the night shift at the shipping docks, and I take whatever landscaping work I can get when the sun comes up. I'm tired, sir. I'm tired all the way to my bones." He gripped the edge of the wooden podium. I could see the grime under his fingernails, the mark of a man who worked the earth. That night, it was Tommy. I had just gotten home from a double shift. I went to check on him, and he was drenched in sweat. I touched his forehead, and it felt like I was touching a stove. He started shaking. His eyes rolled back. I didn't have a thermometer, I didn't have a car seat that fit right, and I didn't have a phone with minutes left on it to call an ambulance. The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear the clock on the wall ticking like a heartbeat. "I threw him in the car," David continued, his voice shaking. "I didn't care about the rain. I didn't care about the speed limit. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror and saw his little face, I thought, not tonight. God, please, not tonight." When I saw that red light, Your Honor, I didn't see a traffic signal. I saw a barrier between my son and the emergency room. I chose him. I'd choose him every single time. I've heard a lot of stories in this chair. Some are masterpieces of fiction, but you can't fake the shaking of a man's hands when he talks about losing his child. But then the most extraordinary thing happened. Tommy, the boy in the oversized coat, let go of his father's hand. He didn't look at the bailiff, who was a foot taller than him. He didn't look at the flags. He marched right up to the base of my bench. He stood so close I could see the lint on his worn-out coat. "Tommy," David whispered, reaching for him. "No, David," I said. "Let him stay." I leaned over the bench. "Tommy, you've got a lot to say for a little guy." Why are you up here? Tommy looked at me. His eyes were huge, filled with a mixture of terror and fierce, unadulterated love. You're the man who takes the money, Tommy said. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. My daddy doesn't have any more. He gave it to the doctor for the medicine. He gave it to the man for the light. He didn't do anything bad. He was being a superhero. Tommy's voice started to rise, fueled by a child's sense of justice. I was sick. My head had the fire in it. Daddy saved me. If you take his money, we can't buy the milk. We can't buy the cereal. Please, Mr. Judge, he's my daddy. Don't be mean to him. The emotional gravity in the room shifted. It felt like the walls were closing in. I looked at my bailiff, a man who has worked with me for years, and I saw him wipe a tear from his eye. The machine of law had just been hit by a bolt of lightning called innocence. I sat back in my high-backed leather chair. I looked at the $500 figure on my screen. Then I looked at the father, standing there in his muddy boots, and the son standing there in his oversized coat. I realized that we, as a society, have created a system that is incredibly efficient at measuring wrong, but incredibly poor at measuring circumstance. A traffic camera is a mathematical perfection. It detects motion and light, but it cannot detect a father's heartbeat. It cannot detect the temperature of a child's skin. It cannot understand the choice between a grocery bill and a hospital bill. Mr. Miller, I said, my voice taking on a weight that felt like the robe itself, you are asking me to ignore a law that exists for the safety of every citizen in Providence. If everyone did what you did, the streets would be a battlefield. You broke the social contract. I paused, letting the weight of the law settle in the room. But, I continued, there is a higher law, a law that isn't written in these thick books on my desk. It's the law of the human heart. It's the law that says a father's first duty isn't to a traffic signal, but to the life he brought into this world. I leaned forward, locking eyes with David. I'm going to ask you a question that every person in this gallery needs to hear. If you walk out of here today and tonight that fever comes back, if Tommy starts shaking again and his breath is shallow, would you do it again? Would you look at that red light and drive through it knowing you'd end up right back here in front of me? David Miller didn't hesitate. He didn't look for a legal answer. He looked at his son, then he looked at me. Yes, Your Honor, I would run every red light in this state. I would go to jail for the rest of my life if it meant I could hold his hand tomorrow morning. I will never apologize for being his father. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. It was the silence of 100 people realizing that they would do the exact same thing. I picked up the gavel. I thought about my own father. I thought about the times he sacrificed his own comfort so I could have a pair of shoes for school. I thought about the thousands of Davids in this country who are working double shifts and still falling behind. The law is a blunt instrument, I told the room, but justice is a surgical one. It requires a soul. It requires a conscience. If we lose our ability to see the human being behind the case number, then we might as well let the computers run the world. I looked at David. I looked at Tommy. I am dismissing this citation, I declared. The court finds that the emergency of a child's life supersedes the technicality of a traffic signal. Case dismissed. You owe the city nothing. Bang. The sound of the gavel hitting the block wasn't a slap on the wrist. It was a break in the chains. David Miller's knees buckled. He grabbed the podium to keep from falling. The relief that washed over his face was so intense it was painful to watch. He had been bracing for a blow that would have ruined his life, and instead, he found a hand reached out to him. But I wasn't done. Dismissing a fine is an act of justice, but it's not an act of healing. I knew that $500 wasn't David's only problem. I knew that when they left this room, they were going back to a world where the rent was still due and the fridge was still empty. I reached under my robe and pulled out my wallet. "Mr. Miller," I called out as he began to walk away. He turned around, his eyes red from crying. I held out a $100 bill. The room gasped. David shook his head, his face turning red. "No, Your Honor, please. You've given me enough. I have my dignity, sir. I'm a worker." "This has nothing to do with your dignity, David," I said, my voice soft but firm. "And this isn't a gift. This is an investment. I am investing in Tommy. I am investing in a boy who had the courage to stand up to a judge to protect his dad. I want him to know that when you do the right thing, when you love someone enough to risk everything, the world sees you. It doesn't just punish you, it sees you." I leaned over the bench and handed the money to Tommy. Tommy, you take this. You take your daddy out for a proper meal tonight. You buy that cereal you like. And you remember this day. You remember that the law isn't just about no. Sometimes the law is about yes. Tommy took the bill like it was a piece of magic. He looked at his dad, then he looked at me, and he gave me a smile that was brighter than any light in that courtroom. After they left, the courtroom felt different. The other defendants were quieter. The atmosphere had shifted from one of me versus them to us. I sat there for a moment thinking about the millions of people in America who are living on the edge. We talk about the rule of law, and we should. It's the foundation of our civilization. But we must also talk about the condition of the people. When a father has to choose between a traffic ticket and his son's health, the system is broken. When a $300 fine can cause a family to become homeless, the system is broken. My job as a judge isn't just to enforce the rules, it's to mitigate the brokenness of the world where I can. I think about David Miller often. I think about the calluses on his hands and the oversized coat on his son. I think about the fact that for one brief hour, in one small courtroom in Rhode Island, the machine stopped. We weren't a government and its subjects. We were three human beings trying to find the light in a very dark room. To expand the narrative further while staying strictly within the perspective of Judge Frank Caprio, I have added a deep 500-word reflection between the verdict and the final call to action. This section focuses on the invisible ledger of the justice system, the things a judge sees that never make it into the official transcript. As David and Tommy walked out of the courtroom, the heavy oak doors swinging shut behind them, a profound stillness settled over the room. I sat there for a moment, my hand still resting on the gavel, feeling the lingering vibration of that final strike. In my 15-plus years on the bench, I have come to realize that there are two sets of records kept in this building. There is the official court transcript, the one the stenographer types with rhythmic precision, documenting every whereas, therefore, and guilty. And then there is the invisible ledger. This ledger doesn't track statutes or fines. It tracks the weight of the human soul. It records the silent prayers of a mother in the third row, the suppressed sob of a man losing his driver's license, and the look of sheer unbridled terror in a child's eyes when they realize their hero is vulnerable. I looked down at the empty podium where David Miller had just stood. The wood was slightly buffed where his trembling hands had gripped the edge. To the computer system, David was simply a high-speed red light violator, a statistical outlier in the 3 a.m. traffic flow of Providence. But the invisible ledger told a different story. It recorded a man who had worked 16 hours straight, whose muscles were screaming for rest, but whose heart was screaming louder for his son's survival. It recorded the fact that he didn't have a single dollar for himself, because every cent went to a pediatric clinic or a utility bill. When we ignore the invisible ledger, we stop being a society and start being a factory. We begin to process people like raw materials, stripping away their stories until all that is left is a violation code. I've seen what happens when the machine of the state runs without a soul. It creates a cycle of poverty and resentment that no amount of policing can fix. If I had taken that $500 from David today, I wouldn't have been enforcing the law. I would have been signing a warrant for his family's eviction. I would have been telling Tommy that his father's sacrifice didn't matter and that the superhero who saved his life was nothing more than a criminal in the eyes of the city. That is a price no city can afford to pay. Justice is not a zero-sum game where the state must win and the citizen must lose. True justice is an equilibrium. It is the moment where the rules of the road meet the realities of the heart. As I watched the light filter through the high windows, I felt a sense of peace. I knew that for one day the invisible ledger had been balanced. We hadn't just followed the law, we had honored the life that the law was meant to protect. This is the burden and the beauty of the robe. It gives you the power to see the invisible, to hear the unspoken, and to remind the world that even in a hall of marble and stone, mercy is the strongest foundation we have. As the afternoon wore on, the memory of David and Tommy stayed with me, like a song you can't stop humming. Each case that followed was seen through the lens of that encounter. Every woman struggling with a parking ticket because she was at a job interview, every man who couldn't pay a fine because his disability check was late, they all became Davids. I often wonder where Tommy is now. I hope he still has that fierce sense of justice. I hope he remembers the man in the black robe not as a figure of fear, but as a witness to his father's courage, because that's what I truly am. I'm not just a judge, I'm a witness. I'm telling you this story because I want you to look around your own life. We are all judges in our own way. We judge the person in front of us at the grocery store. We judge the person who cuts us off in traffic. We judge the people we see on the news. But do we know their Orm Street? Do we know about the fire in the head of their loved ones? Do we know the double shifts they've worked or the fears they carry in their pockets? Empathy is the most revolutionary act a human being can perform. It is the only thing that can stop the machine from grinding us all down. When you choose to listen instead of lecture, when you choose to understand instead of undermine, you are performing an act of true justice. In the quiet hours after the court closes, when the cleaners are buffing the floors and the lawyers have gone home to their families, I sit in my office and think about the legacy we leave behind. It isn't in the number of convictions or the amount of fines collected. It's in the moments where we chose to be human. We live in a world that is increasingly automated. We have cameras for traffic, algorithms for sentencing, and screens for communication. But a computer can't feel the heat of a fever. A computer can't see the love in a child's eyes, and a computer certainly can't reach into its pocket to help a man keep his dignity. The unwritten law is the most important one we have. It's the law of kindness. It's the law of the second chance. It's the law that recognizes that while we must have order, that order must never come at the cost of our humanity. I have a question for you tonight. Have you ever felt like David Miller? Like you were trapped between a rock and a hard place, and the world just wouldn't listen? Or have you ever been a Tommy, someone who saw the truth when everyone else only saw the violation? I want to hear your stories. This channel isn't just about me, it's about us. It's about the human spirit and its incredible ability to survive, even when the lights are red. Leave a comment below. Tell me about a time you experienced mercy. Tell me about a time you showed mercy. I read every single comment. They remind me that the work I do in that courtroom matters. They remind me that even though the world can be cold, there is still a fire of kindness burning in the hearts of people like you. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of a father's love or the purity of a child's heart, please share it. Hit that subscribe button and join our community. Let's make the world a little less like a machine and a little more like a home. I'm Judge Frank Caprio. Thank you for being here with me. And remember, the greatest authority you will ever hold is the authority to be kind.